My name is Sabina. I am 32, and I have just achieved my dream of owning my first home after saving for 10 years. The moment they handed me those keys, I felt a surge of pride I had never experienced before. I deliberately kept this milestone a secret from my family, given our complicated history. Then came the phone call from my mother that changed everything. Your sister Natalie and her family will be moving in with you, she announced cheerfully. I froze in disbelief. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, hit that like and subscribe button, and brace yourself for what my family had planned behind my back. Growing up in my family always felt like I was living in the shadow of my perfect younger sister Natalie. Our parents, Harold and Diana, never tried to hide their preference for her. While they claimed to love us both equally, their actions told a different story. Natalie was the pretty one, the charming one, the one who seemed to effortlessly attract attention and praise wherever she went. I was just the responsible older sister who was expected to set a good example, but never received the same level of appreciation. When Natalie got married at 23 to her high school sweetheart, our parents threw her an extravagant wedding that cost them nearly their entire savings. 2 years later, when she had her first child, they helped with the down payment on her starter home. And when she had her second child just last year, they paid for a brand new minivan because her old car wasn't suitable for a growing family. Meanwhile, I had been working since I was 16, putting myself through college with minimal help and building my career as an accountant through sheer determination and countless late nights. Natalie has a family to take care of, my mother would say whenever I questioned the disparity in their support. You are single and have a good job. You should be more understanding. This was their justification for the unequal treatment, as if my life choices somehow made me less deserving of their help or attention. Over time, I learned to stop expecting anything from them, and instead focused on building my own path. My job as an accountant at a mid-sized firm was stable, but not particularly glamorous. I started in an entry-level position right after college and worked my way up through consistent performance and dedication. The pay was decent, but in our expensive city, it still meant I had to be extremely careful with my finances if I ever wanted to own property. For 10 years, I lived frugally in a tiny studio apartment with outdated appliances and temperamental plumbing. I packed lunch every day instead of going out with coworkers. I cut my own hair to avoid salon costs. Vacations were non-existent. The last time I had traveled anywhere was 5 years ago when a friend got married in another state. I worked overtime whenever it was available, took on freelance accounting projects on weekends, and put every extra dollar into my savings account. My friends often commented on my disciplined lifestyle. Sabina, you need to live a little, they would say when I declined invitations to restaurants or weekend getaways. What they didn't understand was that I had a goal, a vision of independence that kept me going through all the sacrifices. I wanted something that was truly mine, something no one could take away or diminish. The decision to keep my house hunting a secret from my family wasn't made lightly. There had been incidents in the past that taught me to guard my accomplishments. When I got promoted at work 3 years ago, I excitedly shared the news at a family dinner. Instead of congratulations, my mother immediately turned to Natalie and said, "Maybe Sabina can help you with your credit card debt now." Just like that, my achievement became about how it could benefit my sister. Then there was the time I mentioned I was considering taking a vacation with the small bonus I had received. Within days, my parents were calling to ask if I could instead contribute to a family trip they were planning for Natalie's anniversary. "It would mean so much to your sister," my father said. "You know they rarely get a break from the kids." I ended up giving them the money and spending that week at home alone. These experiences made it clear that any resource I had, whether it was money time or living space, was viewed as potentially available for Natalie's benefit. It wasn't that I never wanted to help my family. It was the assumption that I should always be the one to sacrifice that bothered me. So when I finally had enough for a down payment on a modest home, I decided this achievement would be mine alone. At least at first, until I had a chance to enjoy it on my terms. Looking back, I wonder if I should have seen the warning signs. My mother had always made comments about how I had so much extra space, even in my tiny studio apartment. "You could easily fit a pull-out couch in here for guests," she had said during one of her rare visits. At the time, I thought she was just making conversation. Now I realize she had been assessing my living situation with other intentions in mind. My father, too, had been dropping hints. Family should always have room for family, he would say whenever the topic of housing came up. I had nodded in vague agreement, never imagining they would take this principle to such an extreme without my consent. As I made my decision to keep my house purchase private, I felt a mixture of guilt and resolve. In our family culture, secrets were considered a form of betrayal, but I also knew that this was a necessary boundary for my own well-being. I told myself I would eventually share the news, but only after I had settled in and established my home as clearly my own space. Unfortunately, I never got that chance. The search for my perfect home began in January, right after the new year. I had finally reached my savings goal and was pre-approved for a mortgage that would allow me to look for properties in the middle price range for our area. Nothing fancy, but something solid. And most importantly, mine. Finding a real estate agent was my first challenge. I wanted someone who would understand my needs and not pressure me into spending more than I was comfortable with. After interviewing 3 different agents, I connected with Jessica, a straightforward woman in her 40s who specialized in helping first-time homebuyers. "So will your family be helping with the search?" Jessica asked during our first meeting. "No," I replied firmly. "This is my project alone." She nodded, seeming to understand without requiring further explanation. "Then we will find you exactly what you want," she emphasized, and I appreciated her immediate respect for my independence. The first few houses we viewed were disappointing. One had serious foundation issues hidden beneath fresh paint and staged furniture. Another was in a neighborhood that felt unsafe even in broad daylight. A third was perfect inside but located next to a fire station with sirens that would blare at all hours. Each disappointment made me question whether I was being too picky or if my budget was simply too limited for what I wanted. "The right house is out there," Jessica would reassure me after each unsuccessful viewing. "We just haven't found it yet." February turned into March and March into April. I began to worry that the spring market would drive prices up beyond my reach. My lunch breaks were spent scrolling through real estate listings, and my evenings were filled with open houses that never quite met my expectations. The process was exhausting, especially while maintaining my full-time job and keeping the entire search a secret from my family. There were moments of temptation when I considered calling my parents for advice or emotional support. House hunting alone was overwhelming, and I sometimes envied friends who had their families involved in the process, offering opinions and encouragement. But then I would remember past experiences and strengthen my resolve to do this independently. One particularly discouraging Saturday in late April, after seeing 5 properties that were all wrong for different reasons, Jessica suggested we look at just one more house that had just been listed that morning. "It might be slightly above your ideal price range," she warned, "but I think it could be worth stretching for." I was tired and ready to go home, but something in her tone convinced me to agree. We drove to a quiet street lined with mature maple trees. The house was a blue colonial with white trim, not particularly remarkable from the outside, but well maintained with a small front yard and a covered porch. "This is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath," Jessica explained as we walked up the path. "The owners are relocating for work and need to sell quickly. They have already purchased their new home." The moment I stepped through the front door, something felt different. The entryway opened to a living room with large windows that filled the space with natural light. The hardwood floors showed signs of age, but were solid and full of character. The kitchen was modest but functional, with enough counter space for my weekend baking projects. Each bedroom was a decent size, with the master featuring an ensuite bathroom that had been recently updated. But it was the backyard that truly captured my heart. Not large, but private, with a small patio and garden area where I could immediately envision myself having morning coffee or reading in the evening. A mature apple tree stood in one corner, promising shade in summer, and perhaps fruit in the fall. "What do you think?" Jessica asked, though my expression probably already gave away my answer. "This is it," I said softly, afraid to speak too loudly, as if that might break the spell. "This feels like home." We sat at the kitchen counter and drafted an offer immediately. The asking price was indeed at the top of my budget, but Jessica suggested we start slightly below and see if the owner's urgency might work in our favor. I signed the paperwork with shaking hands, suddenly aware that this could actually become my home. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I checked my phone constantly for updates from Jessica, barely able to focus on work. Finally, on Wednesday evening, she called with news. "They've countered," she said, and my heart sank thinking they had rejected my offer. "But," she continued, "it's only 5,000 more than we offered, and they're willing to include the refrigerator and washer dryer." I did some quick calculations. The counteroffer would stretch my budget to its absolute limit, leaving me with a smaller emergency fund than I had planned. But something told me this house was worth it. "Let's accept," I decided. And just like that, I was on my way to becoming a homeowner. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork, inspections, and anxiety. The home inspection revealed some minor issues with the electrical system and a few spots of water damage in the basement, but nothing serious enough to derail the purchase. I negotiated a slight reduction in price to account for these repairs. Working with the mortgage company was perhaps the most stressful part of the process. Every day seemed to bring requests for additional documentation, proof of funds, explanations of deposits, and endless forms to sign. As an accountant, I was familiar with financial paperwork, but the mortgage process took it to a new level. How do people who aren't good with numbers manage this? I wondered aloud to Jessica during yet another signing session. "They suffer," she replied with a laugh, "but you are handling it like a pro." The closing date was set for June 1st, giving me exactly 1 month to prepare for the move. I began packing my apartment in the evenings, sorting through 10 years of accumulated possessions, and deciding what would come with me to my new home. I donated bags of clothes I no longer wore, sold furniture that wouldn't fit my new space, and carefully wrapped the few family heirlooms I had in bubble wrap. My coworkers noticed my distraction, but attributed it to spring fever. Only my closest friend at work, Alicia, knew the truth about my house purchase. "I can't believe you haven't told your family yet," she commented one day over lunch. "Aren't they going to be surprised when you suddenly move?" "That's kind of the point," I admitted. "I want to be settled in before I tell them. Make it clear that this is my space, my accomplishment." She looked concerned. "Just be careful. Secrets in families have a way of causing more trouble than they solve." I brushed off her warning, confident in my decision. In retrospect, I should have listened. Finally, closing day arrived. I took the day off work and met Jessica at the title company's office. The sellers were there too, a friendly couple in their 50s who shared stories about their 20 years in the house, as we waited for the paperwork to be prepared. "We raised our children there," the woman told me with a touch of nostalgia. "I hope you will make as many happy memories as we did." I signed document after document until my hand cramped, and then with the final signature it was done. The keys were placed in my palm, cool metal that represented everything I had worked for over the past decade. "Congratulations, homeowner," Jessica said, giving me a quick hug. "You did it all on your own." Those words meant more to me than she could know. All on my own. No help, no handouts, no owing anything to anyone. Just my hard work and determination. As I drove to my house, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was completely untainted by anyone else's input or expectations. Little did I know that my moment of pure independence would be short-lived. The first night in my new house was simultaneously surreal and completely right. I had moved the essentials that day, just enough to make the master bedroom functional, with a mattress on the floor, a lamp, and a few boxes of clothes. The rest would come over the weekend with the help of a small moving company I had hired. I ordered takeout from a nearby restaurant, sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor, and ate directly from the container while gazing around at the empty space that held so much potential. The house made noises that were unfamiliar, settling sounds and distant neighborhood noises that would soon become the soundtrack of my life here. I fell asleep that night with a smile on my face, wrapped in the knowledge that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The next morning, I awoke to sunlight streaming through windows I had yet to hang curtains on. For a moment, I was disoriented, then remembered with a rush of joy where I was. I padded through the empty rooms in my pajamas, coffee mug in hand, mentally placing furniture and planning colors for each space. The second bedroom, slightly smaller than the master, would become my home office. As an accountant, I occasionally worked from home, and having a dedicated space would be a luxury after years of working at my kitchen table in the studio apartment. I envisioned a substantial desk positioned to take advantage of the natural light bookshelves lining one wall, and perhaps a comfortable reading chair in the corner. The third bedroom was the smallest, but still generous compared to my previous living situation. This would be my guest room, though I had few overnight visitors. Still, it felt adult and established to have a space dedicated to hosting friends or family when they visited. I decided this room could wait to be furnished, as it was the lowest priority. The living room was where I planned to splurge a little. After years of secondhand furniture and practical choices, I wanted a truly comfortable sofa, one that invited lounging with a book or watching movies on rainy afternoons. I had been saving images from design magazines for years, creating a vision of a space that was both elegant and comfortable, with a color scheme of soft blues and greens that reminded me of the ocean. The kitchen needed no immediate changes, though I dreamed of someday updating the countertops to something more modern than the current laminate. For now, I was thrilled with the ample cabinet space and the window above the sink that looked out onto the backyard. I unpacked my collection of baking supplies and arranged them lovingly in a pantry that was all my own. That weekend, as the movers brought in my furniture and stacked boxes in their appropriate rooms, my new house began to take shape as a home. My well-worn sofa looked smaller in the more generous living room, confirming my plan to upgrade when finances allowed. My dining table, which had barely fit in my apartment, now had room to breathe with space for guests to gather around for meals I could finally host. By Sunday evening, most boxes were unpacked. Pictures were hung on walls, and my clothes were neatly arranged in the master bedroom closet that seemed almost too spacious after years of cramped living. I celebrated with a glass of wine on my back patio, watching the sunset through the branches of the apple tree and feeling a profound sense of peace. The following week established my new routine. The commute to work was slightly longer but manageable. I discovered a grocery store just 5 minutes away that had an impressive bakery section. A small park 3 blocks over proved perfect for evening walks. I began to recognize neighbors and exchange friendly waves, though I was still too new to engage in lengthy conversations. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Finley, who lived across the street, brought over a potted plant as a welcome gift. "I saw you moving in last weekend," she said when I invited her in for tea. "It is nice to have a young person in the neighborhood again." I gave her a brief tour of the house, proud to show off my new domain. "You have done a lovely job already," she commented, admiring how I had arranged my living room. "Most people take months to make a house feel this homey." "It helps that I do not have to compromise with anyone else's taste," I replied with a laugh. "Ah, the luxury of living alone," she said with a knowing smile. "I have been a widow for 12 years now, and while I miss my Harold terribly, there is something to be said for arranging things exactly as you please." That conversation stuck with me in the days that followed. The luxury of living alone. It was indeed a luxury, one that I had earned through years of hard work and sacrifice. The ability to decide everything about my environment, from the temperature of the thermostat to which direction the furniture faced, was a freedom I deeply appreciated. I joined the neighborhood association and attended my first meeting at the community center 2 weeks after moving in. The group was primarily focused on maintaining the small park and organizing seasonal events, but it gave me a sense of belonging to something larger than myself. I volunteered to help with the upcoming summer festival, eager to integrate into my new community. At work, I began to mention my new house in casual conversation, though I still kept the details vague when speaking with colleagues who might have connections to my family. Alicia visited for dinner one evening and brought a bottle of champagne to properly celebrate. "This place is amazing, Sabina," she said as we sat in the living room after the meal. "You should be so proud of yourself." "I am," I admitted. "Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real. I keep expecting someone to tell me there has been a mistake and I need to move out." "No mistakes here. You earned this." She hesitated before adding, "Have you told your family yet?" I shook my head. "I am waiting for the right moment." "You cannot wait forever," she warned. "The longer you keep it secret, the bigger deal it will become when they find out." I knew she was right, but something kept holding me back. Perhaps it was the fear that once my family knew, they would somehow insert themselves into my new life here, changing the dynamics I was so carefully cultivating. Or maybe it was simply that I was enjoying having something that was completely mine untouched by family expectations or comparisons. As the weeks passed, my house truly became my sanctuary. I planted flowers in the garden beds and started a small vegetable patch along the sunniest fence. I painted the guest room a soft sage green and finally ordered the new sofa I had been dreaming of. Each change, each addition reinforced my ownership and connection to the space. I began to imagine a future here, years of building memories and creating a life that reflected my values and preferences. Perhaps someday I would share this space with a partner, someone who would appreciate the home I had created and add their own touches without overwhelming mine. But for now, I was content in my solitude, proud of the independence I had achieved. If only that contentment could have lasted longer. It was a quiet Thursday evening in late July, nearly 2 months after I had moved into my house. I was preparing a simple dinner music playing softly in the background windows, open to catch the summer breeze. My phone rang, and seeing my mother's name on the screen, I felt the familiar mixture of obligation and wariness that her calls always provoked. "Hi, Mom," I answered, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder as I continued chopping vegetables. "Sabina, I have been trying to reach you all day," she said, her voice unusually animated. "I have the most wonderful news." I made a non-committal sound used to her definition of wonderful news, often involving something amazing that Natalie had done or received. "What is it?" "Well, first of all, why didn't you tell us about your new house? We had to hear it from Linda at the bank. You know, her son works in the mortgage department and he mentioned your name." My knife stilled mid-chop. The vegetables forgotten, I gripped the phone tightly. "How does Linda know it is me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Small town connections, the very reason I had chosen a bank in a different part of the city for my mortgage, but apparently not far enough away. Oh, how many Sabina Harringtons could there be applying for mortgages? "She was so excited to tell me that you had bought that lovely colonial on Maple Street. Why would you keep something like that from us? We are your family." My mind raced trying to formulate a response that wouldn't sound as defensive as I felt. "I was planning to tell you once I was properly settled in," I said, the excuse sounding weak even to my own ears. "Well, never mind that now," my mother continued, barely acknowledging my explanation. "The timing could not be more perfect. You see, Natalie and Brian are having some financial troubles. The company he works for is downsizing and he has been let go. With 2 children and that mortgage of theirs, they are really struggling." A sense of foreboding washed over me. I knew where this was heading before she even said the words. "So your father and I were thinking, since you now have this big house with 3 bedrooms, Natalie and her family could move in with you for a while. Isn't that perfect? You have always said you would love to spend more time with your niece and nephew." The casual way she announced this plan, as if it had already been decided, left me momentarily speechless. I gripped the edge of the counter for support as the room seemed to tilt around me. "Mom," I finally managed, "you cannot be serious." "Of course I am serious. Why wouldn't I be? Family helps family, Sabina. And you have all that extra space now." "Did it occur to you to ask me before making these plans?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. "Ask you? Why would we need to ask? You are always saying you miss seeing the kids. Now you will have them right there. And it is not like you are using all those rooms. Natalie said you could keep the master bedroom, of course, but they would need the other 2 for themselves and the children." The presumption was breathtaking. Not only had they planned for my sister's entire family to move into my house without consulting me, but they had already been discussing which rooms everyone would take. "Mom, I use those rooms. One is my home office, which I need for work. The other is set up as a guest room." "Oh, you can put your desk in your bedroom," she dismissed. "Lots of people do that, and you won't need a guest room with Natalie's family there. Will you?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "How long are you thinking they would stay?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Well, until Brian finds a new job and they get back on their feet. It might take a few months, you know how the job market is these days. And who would be paying for the additional utilities, food, the wear and tear on the house?" There was a pause, as if this question had never occurred to her. Well, they are a bit strapped right now, as I said. I am sure once Brian is working again, they could contribute something. So I would be providing free housing utilities and probably food for 4 additional people for an indefinite period of time while also giving up my office and any privacy in my own home that I just purchased. My mother's tone turned cold. I see. So your career and privacy are more important than making sure your sister and her children have a roof over their heads. Is that what you are saying? The guilt trip was so predictable, I almost laughed. That is not what I'm saying at all. I am saying that this is a major decision that impacts my life significantly, and no one bothered to consult me before making plans. We are not making plans, Sabina. We are trying to help your sister in a crisis. I really thought you would be more understanding. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar pattern reasserting itself. Natalie's needs were emergencies. Mine were inconveniences. Natalie's family deserved support. My boundaries deserved no respect. I need to think about this, I said finally. This is not something I can decide right now over the phone. What is there to think about? They are family. My mother's voice had risen, indignation clear in every syllable. I will call you tomorrow, I said firmly. Good night, Mom. I ended the call before she could respond and stood in my kitchen surrounded by the home I had worked so hard to create, feeling as if the walls were already closing in. The vegetables lay forgotten on the cutting board as my appetite disappeared completely. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with scenarios, conversations, and the sinking feeling that no matter what I decided, I would lose something precious. By morning, I knew one thing for certain: I needed to face my family in person. This was not a conversation that could happen over the phone. I called in sick to work for the first time in years and prepared myself for what would likely be the most difficult family meeting of my life. The family meeting was set for Saturday morning at my parents' house. I deliberately chose a neutral location rather than inviting them to my home, where they might already start envisioning Natalie's family settled in. As I drove there, my stomach twisted with anxiety, but I was determined to stand my ground. My parents lived in the same 4-bedroom house where Natalie and I had grown up. It was a comfortable suburban home with a well-maintained lawn, and my mother's prized rose bushes lining the front walkway. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Natalie's minivan already parked there. Of course, they had invited her too, probably expecting me to have a harder time saying no to her face. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and steeled myself before walking to the front door. My father answered almost immediately, as if he had been waiting by the entrance. Sabina, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Everyone is in the living room. I followed him down the familiar hallway, photos of our family lining the walls. I couldn't help but notice how many more pictures there were of Natalie, her husband, and their children, compared to images of me, another small reminder of where priorities lay in this family. The living room fell silent as I entered. My mother sat in her favorite armchair, back straight, expression stern. Natalie was on the couch, her husband Brian beside her, looking uncomfortable. Their 2 children, 5-year-old Emma and 2-year-old Lucas, were thankfully not present, probably at a neighbor's or friend's house. Hello, I said, choosing to remain standing rather than joining them on the furniture. It was a small power move, but I needed every advantage. Sit down, Sabina, my mother directed, gesturing to an empty chair. We need to discuss the situation like adults. I took the seat, but sat on the edge, maintaining my posture of readiness. Yes, we do. And adults consult each other before making major decisions that affect each other's lives. My father cleared his throat. Sabina, I know this has come as a surprise to you, but we are facing a real crisis here. Brian lost his job 3 weeks ago, and they have already missed 1 mortgage payment. Brian looked down at his hands, clearly embarrassed. Natalie placed her hand on his knee in a show of support. I understand that is difficult, I acknowledged, and I am sorry about your job, Brian. But that doesn't explain why the solution is for your entire family to move into my house without even asking me first. We didn't officially decide anything, my mother interjected. We were simply discussing possibilities. That is not how Mom presented it on the phone, I countered. She said the timing was perfect and that you had already been discussing which bedrooms everyone would use. Natalie spoke up, her voice soft in that way that had always helped her get her way throughout our childhood. Sabina, we would not want to impose, but the kids are so young and with the job market so uncertain, We are really scared. I looked at my sister, trying to separate my long-standing issues with family dynamics from the genuine difficulty she was facing. I understand you are in a tough situation, Natalie, but you have to understand my perspective too. I just bought this house. I have been there less than 3 months. I have set up my home office in one of the bedrooms because I frequently work from home. This is my space that I saved for 10 years to create. It is just temporary, my father said, until Brian finds a new position. And how long might that be? I asked. A month? 6 months? A year longer? No one answered immediately, which was answer enough. I have a proposal, Natalie said, leaning forward. We would need the 2 spare bedrooms, one for us and one for the kids. We would keep our things contained to those rooms as much as possible. The kids would be in daycare during weekdays so they wouldn't disturb your work. We would handle all the cleaning and cooking as our contribution until we can pay you properly. The fact that she had a detailed plan ready confirmed my suspicion that this had been discussed extensively without me. I felt a surge of anger that I struggled to contain. And what about my privacy? My routine? The quiet? I need to work effectively. The ability to have friends over without navigating around 2 small children. The freedom to decorate and use my spaces as I choose. Those seem like minor inconveniences compared to what your sister is facing, my mother said sharply. They are not minor to me, I replied, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. This is my home, my sanctuary, the place I worked and sacrificed for years to obtain. Why is it automatically assumed that I should be the one to sacrifice my space and privacy? Because you are single, my mother exclaimed, finally getting to the heart of it. You do not have a family to consider. Natalie has children who need stability and security. There it was, the same argument that had defined our family dynamics for years. My life, my needs, my desires were less important because I had chosen a different path than my sister. I may not have children, I said evenly, but that does not make my home any less mine or my boundaries any less valid. Natalie's eyes filled with tears, a response I had seen countless times when she did not get her way. I thought you loved Emma and Lucas. Don't you want to help them? Of course I love them, I said, refusing to be manipulated by her tears. But there are other ways I could help that don't involve giving up my home. Like what? My father challenged. I had anticipated this question and come prepared. I could help you look for an affordable apartment. I could contribute something toward your rent for a limited time while Brian job hunts. I could watch the kids occasionally to save on childcare costs. An apartment would be so cramped for the 4 of them, my mother objected. My house would be cramped for the 5 of us, I countered. And it is not set up for small children. There are no safety features, the stairs are steep, and I have breakable items throughout. We could childproof it, Natalie suggested quickly. That is not the point, I said, frustration mounting. The point is that this is my house, my achievement, and I get to decide how it is used. Brian, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke. Sabina, we appreciate any help you might offer. But we really are desperate here. The bank is already sending notices, and with my industry downsizing everywhere, finding a comparable job quickly isn't looking promising. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. Unlike my sister and parents, Brian had always treated me with respect and seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the current situation. I understand, Brian, and I am willing to help in ways that work for all of us. But moving your entire family into my new home is not one of those ways. So that is it, my mother said, her voice hard. Your sister and her children could end up homeless, but you will not share your precious space. They will not be homeless, I said firmly. You have a 4-bedroom house right here. Why aren't they moving in with you? A telling silence fell over the room. My mother and father exchanged glances. We are too old to have small children running around, my father finally said. And your mother's health isn't what it used to be. Her health seems fine when it comes to volunteering at church 3 days a week or going on cruises, I observed. And you managed just fine when Natalie and I were children. That was different, my mother snapped. We were younger then. So it is fine for me to completely upend my life and career, but not for you to be inconvenienced in your own home. The hypocrisy was stunning. We have done our part, my father said defensively. We raised you girls, put you through school. Now we deserve our retirement years in peace. And I deserve to enjoy the home I worked so hard to purchase, I replied. Natalie, seeing the conversation going nowhere, changed tactics. What if we paid rent? Once Brian finds work, of course. This isn't about money, I explained, though I suspected they wouldn't understand. It is about boundaries and respect, about the fact that all of you made these plans without even considering that I should have a say in who lives in my home. Family shouldn't need formal invitations, my mother said dismissively. Family should respect each other's autonomy, I countered. The conversation continued in circles for nearly an hour. Every time I offered an alternative solution, it was rejected as insufficient. Every time I tried to explain my perspective, I was painted as selfish and uncaring. The emotional manipulation was relentless, from Natalie's tears to my mother's increasingly dire predictions about the future of my niece and nephew. Finally, my father laid down what he clearly thought was his trump card. Sabina, if you refuse to help your sister in this time of need, I don't know how we can continue to consider you part of this family. The threat hung in the air, heavy and blatant. I stared at him, then at my mother, who nodded in agreement, then at Natalie, who looked down but didn't object. The united front against me was complete. In that moment, something broke inside me, but not in the way they intended. Instead of crumbling under the pressure, I felt a strange clarity, as if I could finally see the full picture of our family dynamic without the fog of obligation and guilt. If your definition of family is someone who sacrifices everything while receiving nothing in return, then perhaps I don't want to be part of that family, I said quietly. My mother gasped. You don't mean that. I do, actually. I stood up, gathering my purse. I will help Natalie in ways that don't require giving up my home and independence. That is my final decision. If that means you no longer consider me family, then that is your choice to make. I walked out of the living room, ignoring their calls to come back and be reasonable. As I reached my car, I was shaking, but not from sadness or fear. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had stood firm against the tidal wave of family expectations and manipulation. The drive home was a blur, my mind replaying the conversation and anticipating the fallout that would surely come. But as I pulled into the driveway of my house, I felt a surprising sense of peace. Whatever happened next, I had protected what was mine. In the days following the confrontation with my family, I experienced a roller coaster of emotions. There was guilt, certainly cultivated by years of being taught that my needs came second to Natalie's. But there was also anger at the entitlement they had displayed, and beneath it all, a growing sense of empowerment from having finally stood my ground. My parents' silence was deafening. No calls, no texts, not even the passive-aggressive emails my mother usually sent when displeased. Natalie sent one message 2 days after our meeting. I hope you know what you've done to this family. I didn't respond, unsure what I could say that wouldn't escalate the situation further. At work, I threw myself into projects, staying late and volunteering for additional responsibilities. Keeping busy helped quiet the voice in my head that questioned whether I had made the right decision. Alicia noticed my distraction during lunch one day. You've barely touched your food, she observed. Is everything okay? I hesitated, then decided to confide in her. I explained the situation with my family, their expectations, and my refusal. Wow, she said when I finished. That's a lot to process. How are you feeling about it all? Conflicted, I admitted. Part of me wonders if I'm being selfish, if maybe I should just let them move in temporarily. Would it really be temporary, though? She asked pointedly. From what you've told me about your family dynamics, I'm not sure they'd ever leave. Her words crystallized something I had been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. Once Natalie and her family were established in my home, the pressure to let them stay would only increase. Any attempt to reclaim my space would be met with accusations of cruelty and selfishness. You're right, I said slowly. This isn't really about helping them through a rough patch. It's about them seeing my resources as family resources, while their resources remain their own. Exactly, Alicia nodded. And it sounds like you've already offered genuine help, just not in the exact form they demand. That conversation was a turning point. I realized I needed outside perspective and support to navigate the situation without falling back into old patterns. The next day, I searched for a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and booked an appointment. Dr. Warner was a compassionate woman in her 50s with a direct approach that I appreciated. In our first session, I explained the situation and my conflicted feelings. What you're describing is a common pattern in families with uneven expectations, she explained. You've been assigned the role of supporter, while your sister has been assigned the role of being supported. When you step out of that role by asserting boundaries, it threatens the entire family system. So what do I do? I asked. I don't want to cut them off completely, but I can't keep sacrificing myself either. You've already taken the first and hardest step by setting a clear boundary, she assured me. Now we need to help you maintain it without unnecessary guilt, while also keeping lines of communication open if possible. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Warner helped me craft a strategy. I would reach out once more with a clear written explanation of my position and the specific ways I was willing to help. I would express love for my family but reaffirm my boundaries. And most importantly, I would not engage in further debate or justification of my decision. I also consulted with a lawyer friend, Matthew, about my legal rights and responsibilities. Could they force their way into your home? I asked, voicing one of my deeper fears. Absolutely not, he assured me. Your house is your property. Even if they showed up with suitcases, you have no legal obligation to let them in. And if they tried to stay against your wishes, that would be trespassing. Armed with this knowledge and Dr. Warner's guidance, I composed an email to my parents and Natalie. I explained that while I loved them and was concerned about Natalie's situation, I would not be able to accommodate her family in my home. Instead, I offered 1, to help them find an affordable rental within their budget, 2, to contribute $500 monthly toward their rent for up to 6 months, 3, to watch the children 1 weekend day per week to save on childcare costs, 4, to help Brian with his resume and use my professional network to look for job opportunities. I ended the email by saying that this offer was both generous and sustainable for me, and that it represented the extent of my ability to help while maintaining my own well-being. I made it clear that this was not a starting point for negotiation, but my final position. The response came 3 days later, not via email but in person. I was in my backyard on Saturday afternoon tending to my small vegetable garden when I heard the front doorbell ring. Looking through the peephole, I was surprised to see my entire family standing on the porch, my parents Natalie, Brian, and both children. For a moment, I considered not answering. Was this an ambush? Had they come to try to force their way in after all? But curiosity and a faint hope for reconciliation won out, and I opened the door. "May we come in?" My father asked, his tone more subdued than I had expected. I hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let them enter. The children immediately ran into the living room, touching everything in sight. "Emma, Lucas, be careful," Brian called after them, giving me an apologetic look. "Perhaps the kids could play in the backyard," I suggested, wanting to have an adult conversation without distractions or broken possessions. Brian took them outside, and the rest of us gathered awkwardly in the living room. I did not offer refreshments or make small talk, waiting instead for them to explain their visit. "We received your email." My mother began, her voice carefully controlled. "We've been discussing it as a family." "And," I prompted when she didn't continue. "Your offer is generous," my father said, sounding like the words were difficult to say. "But we still think the simplest solution would be for them to stay here, just for a few months." I shook my head. "My position hasn't changed. I've outlined what I'm willing to do to help, and having them live here isn't part of that. We thought if you saw the children, maybe your heart would soften," my mother admitted, glancing toward the backyard, where Emma and Lucas were exploring my garden. "I love my niece and nephew," I said firmly. "That has never been in question, but emotional manipulation won't change my decision." Natalie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "Brian found a potential job yesterday. It's not as good as his last position, but it would be enough for us to afford a smaller apartment if— She glanced at our parents. If Mom and Dad help with the security deposit, and if you help with rent as you offered. I was surprised by this development, and by Natalie's apparent acceptance of an alternative solution. That sounds promising, I said cautiously. My father sighed heavily. We've decided to provide the security deposit and first month's rent for an apartment, and we'll accept your offer of monthly assistance and childcare. The concession was clearly difficult for them, and I suspected it had more to do with running out of options than truly respecting my boundaries. Still, it was progress. Thank you for being willing to compromise, I said, careful not to sound triumphant. I'm happy to help Natalie and Brian find a suitable apartment. I know of several complexes in good school districts that might work for their budget. The conversation that followed was stilted but productive. We discussed practical matters like apartment hunting, Brian's job prospect, and a schedule for me to watch the children. The underlying tension remained, but at least we were working toward a solution that respected everyone's needs. Before they left, my mother pulled me aside while the others were gathering the children from the backyard. I still don't understand why you couldn't open your home to them, she said quietly. But I suppose you've always been more independent than Natalie. It wasn't quite an acknowledgement of my perspective, but it was the closest thing to acceptance I had heard from her. Yes, I am, I agreed simply. And that's not a character flaw. She pursed her lips, but didn't argue further. As they prepared to leave, I noticed Brian lingering behind the others. Thank you, he said quietly when we had a moment alone, for the help you are offering, and for standing your ground. I think sometimes Natalie and I need to solve our own problems rather than expecting others to solve them for us. His insight surprised me, and I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps some good might come from this conflict after all. Maybe, just maybe, it would lead to healthier dynamics for all of us. As I watched them drive away, I felt an odd mixture of emotions: relief that I had maintained my boundary, sadness at the strain in our relationships, hope that we might find a new equilibrium, and beneath it all, a deep certainty that I had done the right thing for myself, even if the path forward remained uncertain. In the months that followed, my relationship with my family transformed in ways I never could have predicted. The initial tension gradually gave way to a new dynamic, one built on more honest communication and clearer boundaries. Natalie and Brian found a modest two-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. True to my word, I contributed to their rent for 6 months while Brian established himself in his new job. It wasn't his dream position, but it provided stability and benefits, which was what they needed most. Every Saturday, I had Emma and Lucas at my house, giving Natalie and Brian a much-needed break. Those days became something I genuinely looked forward to as I got to know my niece and nephew as individuals, rather than extensions of the family drama. We baked cookies in my kitchen, planted sunflowers in the garden, and read stories on the porch swing I had installed beneath the apple tree. Auntie Sabina, Emma said one Saturday as we colored at the dining table. I like coming to your house. It's peaceful. Her observation touched me deeply. I like having you here, I told her honestly, especially when we can enjoy our time together like this. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now had a relationship with the children that was probably healthier than it would have been had they moved in. Our time together was intentional and positive, rather than strained by conflicting needs and resentments. My parents were slower to adjust to the new boundaries I had established. For several weeks, my mother's calls were perfunctory and cold. My father barely spoke to me at all. But gradually, as they saw that I remained firm but fair in my support of Natalie's family, their hostility began to soften. 3 months after our confrontation, my mother called with a different tone. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, uncharacteristically hesitant. About boundaries and respect. I waited, unsure where she was going with this. I may not have always been fair in how I treated you and Natalie, she continued. I think I assumed you didn't need as much because you seem so capable. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was an acknowledgement I had never expected to hear. I was capable, I agreed, but that didn't mean I didn't need support or recognition. I see that now, she said quietly. Your father and I have been talking about it. We're we're proud of what you've accomplished with your house. We'd like to come see it properly sometime, if that's all right. Just to visit, not to judge or interfere. That visit, when it happened 2 weeks later, was remarkably different from their first appearance on my doorstep. My parents arrived with a house plan as a gift and genuinely admired the home I had created. My father even helped me fix a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, working alongside me without trying to take over the project. You've done well for yourself, Sabina, he said as we put away the tools. This is a beautiful home. Thank you, Dad. I replied, those simple words of approval meaning more than I wanted to admit. Natalie and I found a new equilibrium as well. The experience had forced her to take more responsibility for her family's situation, and I saw a new maturity in how she handled challenges. We began meeting for lunch every other week, just the two of us, rebuilding our relationship as sisters, without the competitive dynamic that had defined it for so long. I was angry at you at first, she confessed during one of these lunches 6 months after the confrontation. I felt like you were abandoning us when we needed you. I know, I said, but I wasn't abandoning you. I was just refusing to sacrifice my entire life to solve a problem that had other solutions. She nodded slowly. I see that now. And honestly, I think it's been better for us to find our own way. Brian seems more confident since he found this job on his own, and I've started taking online classes to improve my own career options. I'm proud of you, I told her, and meant it. Would you believe I've actually started saving money? She said with a small laugh. Just a little each month, but I'm thinking long term now. Maybe someday we'll buy a house again, but this time we'll be better prepared. That comment, more than anything else, showed me how much had changed. Natalie was planning for her family's future rather than expecting others to provide for them. In my own life, I continued to make my house truly mine. I finally renovated the kitchen countertops, replacing the laminate with quartz that brightened the entire space. I built a proper office in the second bedroom with custom shelving and an ergonomic workspace that enhanced my productivity when working from home. The third bedroom remained a guest room, now occasionally used by my niece and nephew for sleepovers. My social circle expanded as I hosted dinner parties and garden gatherings, introducing my friends to my home without anxiety about family interference. I even started dating again, feeling secure enough in my boundaries to consider sharing my life, though not necessarily my space right away with someone special. Through regular sessions with Dr. Warner, I worked through the lingering guilt and people-pleasing tendencies that had made it so difficult to stand up for myself. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, she reminded me often. It's necessary for healthy relationships. 1 year after the confrontation, my family gathered in my backyard for a barbecue. It was the first time we had all been together in a social setting since that tense meeting, and I was nervous about how it would go. But as I watched my father grilling hamburgers, my mother chatting with neighbors, and Natalie and Brian relaxing while their children played on the small swing set I had installed, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what family could be when based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. We had weathered a storm and emerged with relationships that, while still imperfect, were more honest and balanced than before. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down and people began to leave, my mother pulled me aside. I want to thank you, she said softly. For the barbecue? I asked, confused. No. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. For standing your ground last year. I didn't see it then, but you forced all of us to find better solutions. Solutions that actually worked, rather than just postponing the inevitable. Her admission stunned me into silence. Your father and I weren't doing Natalie any favors by always rushing to rescue her, she continued, watching her and Brian these past months, seeing how they've grown and become more self-sufficient. It's made me realize some things about how we raised you girls. It's never too late to change, I offered, not wanting to dwell on past mistakes. She smiled, her eyes unexpectedly moist. No, it isn't. And I'm trying. As the last of my guests departed and I stood alone in my kitchen surveying the remains of the gathering, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been difficult, but I had protected something precious, not just my physical home, but my right to determine my own life path. Learning to say no to those we love is perhaps one of life's hardest lessons. It requires us to value ourselves enough to risk disapproval and conflict. But sometimes saying no is the most loving thing we can do, not just for ourselves, but for others who need to find their own strength. My house stands as a testament to my independence and determination. Each room, each carefully chosen detail represents not just my taste or preferences, but my commitment to living authentically. The boundaries I established have not walls that separate me from my family, but rather clear lines that allow us to relate to each other as adults, with respect flowing in both directions. I still help my sister when needed. I still love my parents despite their flaws, but I do so from a place of choice rather than obligation, of genuine caring rather than guilt. And that has made all the difference. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who felt entitled to your resources or space? How did you navigate that challenging terrain while still maintaining relationships? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect what they've worked hard to achieve. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that true family support should lift everyone up, not require some to always sacrifice for others. I still help my sister when needed. I still love my parents despite their flaws, but I do so from a place of choice rather than obligation, of genuine caring rather than guilt. And that has made all the difference. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who felt entitled to your resources or space? How did you navigate that challenging terrain while still maintaining relationships? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect what they've worked hard to achieve. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that true family support should lift everyone up, not require some to always sacrifice for others.